plan. So we talked about the communication mindset. We talked about core vocabulary. Now we're going to talk about aided language input. So how do we help kids learn about these core words that we want them to use? So it's called aided language input, and it's you or whoever the communication partner is using this AAC, this communication system, this core board that we showed you. We call it visibly represented language. And you're going to use that core board as well as your speech to provide a model to the student using AAC that closely represents the type of output that's expected. So if you happen to be in a classroom and that student is using an eye gaze system, you would want to model for them or use aided language input on that system, right? If you're using that 4-button talkable, you would want to demonstrate or give an example on that talkable. If you're using that 32 location core board, the no tech one, you're going to want to use that as an example. I think of it as a show and tell, right? We're showing them how to do it. We're not making them do exactly what we're doing. So you can think about it this way. We're demonstrating how the symbols work, but we're not requiring it. So we're not making them build the sentence we want them to or push the button that we want them to. It's not a compliance task, right? So we want to encourage, inspire, not require. And if you're a teacher, one of the things that we know about the word model is it could mean, I want you to do exactly what I just did. So imitate me. That's not what we're going for here. We're showing them what's possible in terms of communication. So if we're imitating, we're doing, I show you, you do it, right? The individual is a passive responder. We're physically prompting. We're moving their hand through the motions. It's a very rote learning compliant task. What we want is to demonstrate. I'm going to show you how you could do it. The emphasis is on that cognitive clarity, understanding what's going on. So if you think about if you're in rehab or you're doing something and you have a physical therapist, they're just moving your hand through doing something. You're half the time. I was there, a friend of mine was getting PT, and we were talking and she was reading a book. Like she wasn't paying any attention to what was happening with her arm. Right. So she clearly wasn't cognitively engaged in that interaction. She was not an active participant in that interaction. She was a passive responder. So we really want to be thinking about that difference. So this is from Project Core. It is only a point if they see it. Now, we don't want to get legalistic about this, but we also want to be at least in their vicinity, right? We want to be modeling when they're around. So sometimes we might draw their attention to a communication system. Voice output can be very powerful, that they'll start attending to that. It is not about necessarily them making eye contact with us or that joint attention. It is more about shared attention. So we're looking at the communication system, or we're looking at a communication board. We're looking at a shared reading book and talking about it. So these are the functions. I talked a little bit about of communication, and there's a bunch of them. And so we've given you a form that has a list of them. But the functions are, so we've talked about requesting, but they're also greeting and calling attention and protesting and asking and rejecting and directing and initiating, accepting choices, like all kinds of functions of communication, the how to use those words. And this is the big list. So we've got at the top the purposes, and then we've got at the bottom that list of functions. That's important when our students are building language. And so, Janet, I'm going to let you take over now.
Okay, this is our 32 core board. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our core board, and then as I'm blowing the bubble, try to think of some phrases or even just some comments or one word that you could use to talk about these bubbles.
So Janet wants to play.
Yeah, here we go. I'm gonna blow some just so you can really get in the mood. You should be surrounded by them at your home, but you don't have any. These are the best bubbles in the world. And if you can think about using that core board now, and some of these things you said, what would this be? Would this be requesting, commenting, seeking information, or refusing?
Pause your video and complete the chart on slide 34.
Good job. This is a nice activity to do when you're building phrases around something. So we're going to talk in a minute about these 5-minute fillers. But what are the phrases? Because you want to prepare ahead. If you're going to be playing with bubbles or doing something, you want a list of those that you can be modeling or doing aided language input with while you're doing that activity. This is the module for aided language input on Project Core. And there's 2 types of modules. So when you go into the module, you can either do the self-directed one, which you kind of jump into it. There's a little quiz, you go right through it, and then it ends and you take a quiz and you get a certificate for attendance. And sometimes you might be able to use that for professional development or school improvement in your building. The other version is called the facilitated version, and they've taken everything that they needed to make the self-directed one, and you now have it separately. So you have activities, you have the script, you have the video that's connected to it, you have a PowerPoint connected to it, so that you could facilitate a training, a mini training with families or with other staff, and it's already prepared for you. We're going to talk a few minutes about attributing meaning to student behaviors. And so in this process, I'm sure that you have students that they might push a button on a communication system, they might hit the board, they might give some kind of behavior to you that you want to connect to communication for them. And so we're going to tell them what they did. It might be, oh, I see you smiling. It might be, I see you moving your hand toward an object they might want. It might be, and we'll go through some options of something with their body is changing and you're acknowledging that. So you're telling them what they're doing, and then you're going to infer what that behavior might mean. So you're telling them, then you're inferring, I think you like that. Or you're telling me no, as they're pushing things off their tray. Like, I'm guessing you don't want that anymore. And so if we're doing that on a communication system, we might have somebody smiling and we're saying, oh, I see you smiling. I think you like that. So we want not only to describe their behavior, attribute meaning to it, or infer some understanding of that behavior, but then also connect it to conventional communication, being able to show them on an AAC system what you would say and where those words might be. And so these are the 3 components to revisit. So we're focusing on or tuning into the student behaviors and honoring those behaviors as a form of expression. So I have one student that I worked with years ago, and he kicked everything. He was kind of a maniac, right? And he was in a wheelchair, but that one foot, I'm telling you, that worked really well. He kicked really hard. He pushed away from the table. He pushed away from the lockers. And we went to U of M because we were trying to figure out what access, right? What part of his body can he use to communicate? Now, mind you, we're not like real thrilled about his foot and his ability to kick. Sure enough, the engineer that we were working with said, well, why don't you have him use his foot? Oh my gosh, right? I'm thinking, let's get rid of that behavior. That is not very fun. Sure enough, he began to become a communicator on a high-tech system using his foot. Now, we moved him into other parts of his body, but we were not honoring that behavior. Like, he truly, I think, was telling us things like, stop, I don't want to do this, take me away, I don't want to be there, but we did not honor it in the way we should have. Then we're going to interpret that behavior, and then we're going to model what they might be saying. So this is a video that Kristen our wonderful colleague, put together. She is a wonderful videographer. She can create amazing things with chunks of video that you would think you can't do anything with this. And then she does. And it was designed during the season when we were supporting parents a lot during COVID, but it is very useful for any of us to get a handle on what exactly aided language input or supporting AAC in the home. So here's just a couple examples for you to think about. So the first one kind of gives us what we should be doing here. During shared reading, the student stops when what he or she is doing and looks directly at the page. So we've got a book out and they like hyper focus right on that page. So if we're labeling that behavior, we might say, I see you looking at that, and point to where they're looking. Then we might say, you like that? I like it too. Then you might say, with the core board, I like it.
Pause your video and complete the chart on slide 36.
What we don't want to do is do hand over hand. Now, if you're doing it, then our goal is for you to stop doing it because now you know better. We want to, one, not be touching kids as much as we do, right? We really need to get to a place where we're honoring their body autonomy because our kids are the most at risk for abuse. And so we've got to start early, helping them say no, not having their, our body on theirs all the time. We also know that hand over hand is not helpful. So remember when we talked about, like, if we're, doing something with the device and we're in rehab, right? And my body isn't really, I'm not paying attention. Hand over hand is basically the same thing. We're bringing them to a device, but they're not cognitively engaged. They're not connected to that interaction. They're probably not even paying attention. And then over time, we have them rejecting us grabbing them or trying to touch them. And that's not helpful either. And this is a handout, a blog post that was done by a colleague of ours, Jane Farrell. And so she goes through what it means to do this and some of the things that are not helpful, right? About touching kids and pulling their hands. And it doesn't mean that you don't have a go talk at some point and you kind of grab their hand and put their hand on top of yours. We call that hopping on, and then bringing their hand over so they can see what you're working with. Remember, it's not a point unless they see it, but you don't want to be hanging on. You don't want to be moving their hand around because in reality, they're not paying any attention anywhere. It is not helpful. But it is frustrating when they're not interacting, right? We're expecting something and they're not giving us anything. Kristen, do you want to speak to that? Because I know it's a really, it's something that you've learned over time, but you feel very strongly about not doing it and how it doesn't work.
I do feel very strongly about it for a couple of reasons. One, I did it in the beginning of my AAC career, and it quite simply didn't work. The students never developed independent communication that way. What they learned was that lady will just take my hand and say something and there's nothing I can do about it. And, basically I forced them to say things that maybe they didn't intend to say. It was really, not good. And they didn't make any progress. And so Janet was my consultant and I said, what's going, it's not working. And she's like, well, you need to stop that. And it took me a little bit of time to stop actually, because I wanted but they're not doing anything and my data sheets are empty. And, but what I learned was a couple of things. One, to do more motivating and fun activities where they would want to, and how long, the other thing I didn't realize was how long you need to model on your core board or on their device before they are comfortable reaching out and touching that board themselves. Some of our students take a very long time of watching you before they're ready to reach out and touch that board. They're afraid they're going to be wrong because of, especially my students, because I was a bit of a miser, like, okay, the word is more, you're only allowed to say more. And if you don't say more and you say something else, it's wrong. So that was the wrong approach. And my students were a little bit afraid that if they said something, it would be incorrect. So it really creates this dependency that you don't need. And so I was doing that in a high school, and then I was moved to another building, our post-high building, and then I got all those students back, and I had to undo all of my damage that I did to them, which we did successfully do. So if you need help undoing prompt dependency, I can help you with it. But it's really important. There are some strategies to motivate students to start to reach out on their own. But it's better if you're not touching them at all. And I don't even do the hop on, because sometimes kids get dependent on that too. So yeah, reach out if you have questions about that, because I've had a number of not only in my own professional life, but as a consultant, some things we've had to undo. It's better just not to start.
Yeah. So for sure, let us know if you have needs.
Mhm.
Typically, we don't talk about cautions, but with AAC, we really felt this was a list that we needed to bring to you. Stop or greatly limit your use of yes and no questions, because it stops the interaction, right? They answer no and we're kind of done, or they answer yes and we're kind of done, right? We want that reciprocal interaction. Quizzing, which results in one-word responses, right? So we ask them, do you want this or this? And they give us the answer, and then we're kind of stuck again. Not ever allowing regular access to the system. Don't take the system away. Let's work with them on how to use the system, but let's not just extinguish it and take it away. If we were working with typical kids that were verbal communicators, we can't really take their mouth up, right? We have to do some behavior work to get them to use the system well.
Yeah. Can I just talk just for a hot second about that one too? I have some classrooms that I've come across where they really looked at the AAC system as like a task that you do for a short period of time and then put away in the closet. So we had to talk about some strategies to, no, it's all day. It's not a game or an educational task that you do for 20 minutes and then put away. It's there all the time, and you are talking to them all the time with those symbols.
Excellent. And so there's just a few more. Don't ask the same question twice because you think they gave you the wrong answer. If they choose something like an eye gaze, they pick this one, don't switch them. Like, assume they gave you the right answer. And if they didn't, right, they're going to let you know pretty quickly when you give them the gummy bear and they really wanted the fish cracker, right? They're going to like pitch a fit, and you're going to figure out they communicated something that they didn't really want. Using artificial reinforcers, good talking. We want to slow down so that they have an opportunity to communicate. We don't want to assume all their needs, which we're really good at, right? Often in this profession. And we don't want to assume we always know what they want. And so we want to make sure that they have an option to communicate, like juice, right? Versus coffee. They didn't want juice anymore, but we bought it ahead. And so here's some nice temptation activities. And this is one that Janet did with us, right? Bubbles, wind-up toys. Kristen talked about getting more engaging rather than just requiring.
Pause your video and explore assistive wear 5-minute filler resources on slides 38 and 39.
Almost done. This is a general self-reflection form that you have access to. And in this form, it asks some really powerful questions about your classroom environment. So all students have access to their own personal communication system with CORE, or adults recognize and respond to students' efforts to communicate. And then you can rate yourself. And then you can make comments like, I want to work on this, or I'm going to choose this one next. This is a really nice form to use with the teams that you work on. So you want to think about what's your takeaway for aided language input, and what knowledge, what will you do with that knowledge?
Congratulations, you've made it to the end. Complete your self-reflection on aided language input on slide 43. As you complete this course, think about these things. What is your takeaway? Who will you influence with this knowledge? And what will you implement from this topic? Thanks and good luck.